Hello and welcome to this chapter. Here we'll briefly have a look to all the lines that didn't fit in the course that are not good, I'd say, but okay, you can face them, and since it's a lifetime repertoire, I need to show them. But okay. After knight f6, white has huge variety of weird moves, and use this chapter to learn some strategy, let's say, or just general structure concepts that I will use. So here, for instance, f3, we could obviously play c5 because the diagonal is very weak, let's say here, so white doesn't have the chance to take on c5 or to be a bit fancy about it. But here I would recommend to play d5. As I stated in another line, when white plays knight c3, I mean, this f3 doesn't give anything, and we are going for c5. And e4 is a possibility. White gives up a pawn for initiative. This is very well known. You can even find it in the way of d4, d5, e4 here, giving up the pawn. And here c5. The idea is to open up the diagonal and force d5, and after taking, we just play g6. And basically, as I said, this is set in the text. This is like the Benoni, but white doesn't have the two pawns on e2 or f2, and we don't have the pawn on d6. So obviously, something went very wrong for white. So white has different tries. There is a funny idea which is g4. I remember there was a guy that would play this all the time, and one friend was playing against him. And I remember preparing against it, like, I don't know, ruining the fun of the guy that was an amateur, obviously. But here after we just take, white gets some space, but we counter immediately the center. And after bishop e2, the idea is to kind of annoy our bishop, but we just can go back. And basically, we have a French or Caro-Kann, however you want to feel it, but we have the pawn on g2. So basically in the long run, we are just winning, yeah? It doesn't matter. We can choose both approaches, and yeah, it's just trash. And here we have g3, which is not that silly, and actually I've seen this move played quite a lot. And g3, as you might imagine, we answer it the same way we answered all the moves, almost, which is c5. And basically after d5, we just want to play b5 as usual. And g3 is much less useful than any kind of like knight f3 or bishop f4 that at least brings some pieces to the center and some initiative. And here white doesn't really have much to do. a4 is usually how white plays this, because now c4 is allowed. But as we said before, in other chapters as well, we are very happy to play b4, so if they force us, it's like, okay. And here b3, and white tries to counter our diagonal. And here we have a funny line that I discovered while checking this, because after bishop b2, I usually like to stop analyzing whenever our opponent doesn't have an obvious move, as I stated many times. And here I thought bishop g2 looks normal, e4 looks normal, and now the knight on e2 looks a bit more consistent, as white at some point wants to play f4, and this bishop wants to get open. And I mean, having both knights here makes sense that we have white has both diagonals open. And here I really like the idea of including a5 a couple of moves before that I did not say anything about it. Now we play e6. And after d6, there is an obvious threat here. If you don't know it, then be careful about it, which is e5. And white is doing a double threat. That's why knight e2 is also very appealing. And so d6, I really like rook a7. Basically, if white wants to ignore us, okay, we can just take, and then the rook comes to the second rank, and maybe we can go for knight d7 and get all the dark squares. We can also take with the pawn and play e5, knight c3, knight d4. Like basically the rook is coming to f7, so we are very happy to activate all our pieces. After e7, look at these rooks. Looks amazing. And here after f3, white feels safe. White is like, okay, everything is gonna be fine. Nothing is gonna worry me anymore. I will develop the rest of the pieces. The d6 pawn is very weak. our opponent played the Benoni and has a terrible bishop in the light squares that is just colliding against our pawn chain. But here we have knight g4. White is still not castled. And remember, if our opponent is still not castled, bad things can happen. So now we are doing some kind of a weird double threat. We are threatening the bishop on b2, and also we are threatening knight e3. White needs to take, and after knight e3, we just take the bishop. And here we are not just happy to take on g7, we want more. And after rook f3, I mean, here we could take the bishop, we would be winning, because the rook is kind of entering everywhere. But here it's so beautiful how the rooks are combining, and how the rook from a8 actually helped doing mate like 8 moves later, yeah? It was a really smooth idea. Okay, at least if you're here in this chapter, you just want to have fun. Yeah, we are covering some like sidelines. And yeah, I mean, some funny ideas, some dynamic lessons that can be useful for you. So let's say white plays c4. Here white still has some room for weird stuff. One is knight c3, and this idea has been seen in different approaches. Like for instance, if white plays knight c3, one of the ideas here is to allow cd5 and the queen takes, and then the queen goes here, and it's interesting. Actually, we know it from this move order, actually, that c5, knight c3, this is interesting. That's why I suggest d5 here, in order to prevent this idea. And here white can do something similar, but the pawn on c4 doesn't add much to the mix. White doesn't really want to castle long with the pawn on c4. And here we are just very much ahead. And here, for instance, queen h4, actually, since white doesn't have this bishop develop, we can go for knight b4. We have threat knight c2, and after rook b1, d5, for instance, and white is almost losing. Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't work. And if queen d1, just e6, and basically we will play bishop b4, for instance. White will be kind of forced to defend, otherwise we can take, and we have an excellent pawn chain. Basically, we will pressure the isolated double pawns, and white is very late in development as well. Here, let's say bishop d2, and here, yeah, this position, just bishop d6, I would say. And here play the isolated gameplay. Like if white takes, let's say, and tries to play safe, we will play h6, rook e8, bishop g4, rook c8, later on bishop b8, try to pressure through the diagonal. I don't know, it's how it should be played, this position. And yeah, don't be worried about the isolated pawn. It's also a lot about the flow of the pieces, and the bishop on d2 is kind of ugly as well. So yeah, it's just a move that you could be facing. So e6, and here we have some other options. One is d takes e6. Actually, I faced this over the board and got almost lost position in few moves, so it's not that stupid. Basically, white usually doesn't take on e6 because we have all the center suddenly. We take with the f pawn, we'll play d5, and then after castling we will get some presence here. But after g3, take bishop g2, we are kind of loose on the light squares. The pressure here would imply that we need to play d4. This bishop will be strong, and white will be able to tackle our center, and we will be a bit exposed also on this diagonal. So we want to reinforce the pawn on d5, and after knight c3, knight h3, it's actually a very clever development, so white doesn't interrupt the bishop. And here it was very important to play bishop d6. I did not do that, and I got into severe trouble here. And the idea is basically to kick this to whatever the knight comes here, we just take. And now we just play bishop b6 or rook e8 and castle, and we have a strong center. We did not commit to d4, so basically we still control the light squares, and later on we'll play queen d7, rook d8, and then exchange this bishop. And this bishop will be completely irrelevant, and we'll still have some presence on the light squares. This would be the ideal way to approach it. Yeah. Okay, I just want to put some eyes into it because it wasn't that obvious for me at all during the game. And after bishop g5, we could even try to play bishop b5. We have friend in b2 and bishop b6 is coming. And also this knight is, if white doesn't play knight f4, this knight is also under the threat, so white cannot easily take on d5 without implying some risk to the knight. And we have another couple options. One is f3. I mean, f3 is not that silly. The idea is to play somewhat of... I mean, you could take and ignore completely everything of this and just play it like normal, but white wants to delay the development of this b1 knight and now play knight c3 and basically solve all the problems on the king side. So if you recall from this chapter, from the chapter where we talked about these structures, white has the problem that both pieces want to develop through here. And basically, if the knight goes here, we go for h5. If the bishop goes to d3, we can exchange it later with knight d7, knight d5. So this way, white kind of solves all the problems and delays the development of the b1 knight that can go to c4, which is actually perfect. So it's not the end of the world, like it's playable for black. It's not too special, I'd say, but okay, we have the option to play b5, to play a bit more aggressive. This move is actually, I played with black against knight f3 and b5. It's very risky, it's considered wrong, but can be played. But against f3, it's much, much, much better. Like white is much weaker in development, and taking a pawn would be terrible here. So for instance, taking now and play d5, we could even go for c4, bishop c5. I mean, this f3 completely hinders like all white prospects on development on the center. Like it's very difficult for white to move on. So e4 is a must. And now after we take, here there is a funny trick. I don't know if you know it. If you don't know it, maybe think about it, because it's very... If you played the f3 variation in the Nimzo Indian, or you face it with black, you're pretty sure you will know it. And here knight d5 is a very sweet trick, and after ed, queen h4 check. And we are getting a pawn. And if white is forced to give up the bishop pair, we are very happy. Like now we play knight c6. And usually you would reach this position with the bishop on b4 and the knight on c3. And the bishop on b4 is much less efficient, and also it doesn't allow our knight to be developed. And this position is much more riskier, I would say, for white in this case. So the bishop helps gluing all the position, all our position, and cover the d6 square, which is maybe the weakest point on our position. So now knight c3 is more or less the must, and after taking, we have another thematic idea, which is e5. This can be seen in many variations. In the Queen's Gambit accepted with c5, and well, all over the place, I would say. Like white wants to force us to play knight g8, and then take on d5, and you realize how our pieces are just crying, yeah? But here we have one of my favorite suggestions, which is d4, and you're like, but Albert, I cannot do that. I take on f6, and if you take on c3, I play queen e2 check, and you're losing a piece. I need to block on a7. But here the point, hear me out, is to play d5. And look at this beauty! And come on, tell me you don't like this center. It's amazing. Like all the pawns are very well defended, and basically white cannot do anything to break it. And we'll need to give up a piece or two, and we'll still have a couple pawns. And basically the rest of our pieces just develop really smoothly, and white cannot move this knight here because I will smack it. And in the future I will castle very fast and actually pressure through d3 and not allow this bishop to develop. Like, it's amazing. It works beautifully. So yeah, this way you check these shitty sidelines, but also learned some very important strategical concept, which is this e5, because here, since the pawn is on f3, it's much, much worse for white, and we have this extra option, but usually would mean you are already losing. You're almost losing, yeah? Because this e5 is usually very strong. So here, yeah, so here it's good for you to know. Here knight d5 is a must. And now bishop a6 would be a great example how to play, because we force white to invest a couple tempi to take on c4, and then we will have time to develop the rest of the pieces, and white is, again, a bit awkward. So finally, we have knight f3. This was slightly shown in the move orders, but it's better, I feel, to say it here. It's a very important move order, and it would imply that we get a different kind of position, or white gets an extra option. Here we play d6. This is very important. We don't take on d5, straightforward. Why is that? Because here white has the extra option to play e4 in one go, let's say, or h3 first. Yeah, let's not allow, or... Well, this is not like bishop. I was thinking of bishop g4, but here queen a4 check sometimes is a good answer, as our bishop is kind of trapped outside the pawn structure. But let's say white can play h3 first, and then after g6, e4 is incredibly precise. And after bishop g7, bishop d3, castle, castle, you realize that white did not commit on c3, so we don't have the same approach with b5. Here we could go for this. But yeah, it's this kind of position that I don't like you to have if it's not needed. Yeah, this is analyzed in the last chapter of the delayed Benoni, because white can afford to play this way and can delay knight c3. But and you will have it there, so for your information. But the most consistent play is to play d6 first, and if white here tries to do something fancy, like take with knight, we just take, and basically it's not the same as before with the pawn on c2 that we were talking about, that it's a bit wrong. Let's say here, if white plays knight f3, here we play b5, because e6 now allows knight c3 and take. This is much worse, because white can play bishop f4, e4, bishop c4, and has room for all the pieces. But committing to c4 makes it so white is much, let's say, slow in this plan, and the bishop doesn't have this beautiful square, so we are happy to face it. So basically here white has this extra option, and also d6 is possible, but now f6, and again we have the same position as before. And we talked about, we played d6, but it's fine, like white did not commit to controlling d5, so if we are in time to play d5 safely, we are more than happy. So basically, yeah, it's a chapter to wrap it up. Yeah, like to have some of these side lanes, or some of these weird moves, like maybe some of the questions you might have during the course, like this d6, why we don't take, why we are looking for different stuff. So yeah, basically white doesn't really have anything too fancy here, but yeah, it's a chapter that must be done since it's a lifetime repertoire, and I hope you at least have fun and you remember this super duper maneuver, and I don't know, and you keep enjoying your games in the Benoni. So yeah, see you in another chapter.